the big story. And tonight there's growing speculation that Rishi Sunak may capitalise on a post-budget political bounce and call a snap election in May. On Wednesday, the Chancellor is expected to reveal that the economic outlook for the country is positive, with the worst effects of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine now behind us. Plus, there is speculation that Jeremy Hunt will reduce taxes on hard-working Brits in order to boost the economy and put money back into people's wallets. So, could Britain be a week or two away from an announcement of a general election? Let's get the views of one of the most respected journalists in the country and political biographer, Tom Bauer. Tom, great to see you in the studio. First of all, a dilemma for Rishi Sunak. If he waits till November, he looks like he's hanging on for dear life. But if he goes in May, the economy hasn't had a chance to pick up. What would you do?
Well, I think it's all got to do with the Rwanda flights. I think that the rush now to get the legislation through, probably by Easter, one flight off to Rwanda and then the election will be called. I think that must be his tactic, not announced, but undoubtedly that is a dividing line with Labour and would make it much easier for the Tories to fight on immigration.
So you think, therefore, if he can get that first Rwanda flight in the air by Easter, that's a May poll would be his preferred?
Well, it'll be early April. I mean, the legislation, I believe, will get through by Easter, and then the first plane will fly off in early April, and then he'll call the election. That's the way he should do it, because there'll be a clear dividing line with Labour.
Wednesday is a big day. It's a big day for my viewers and listeners. It's the budget. It's a big day politically. Is Jeremy Hunt the right man for the job?
Sadly not. I think Jeremy Hunt has totally failed as a politician, and he failed completely as a Tory Chancellor. He gives absolutely no hope whatsoever. I don't even believe he's a proper capitalist Conservative. I mean, even to allow speculation that the Tories may cancel non-dom status is such an un-Tory thing to suggest, because the non-doms won't stay in Britain to pay the taxes. They'll just go off to Portugal or Italy or any of these countries to avoid it, where it's all enshrined. And that is not, and the amount of money that can be raised is pitifully small, and it sends out all the wrong signals that London and Britain is open to the world as an entrepreneurial Singapore-on-Thames. So I'm really disappointed, but not surprised, because I've never had any confidence in Jeremy Hunt. He would have lost the 2019 election, which Boris so gloriously won, because he's not a convincing Tory.
I can't say I'm his biggest fan. During the pandemic, I thought he showed his true colours and his values by praising China's approach to the pandemic.
Well, not only that, you're absolutely right. But what has he since done? No budget has actually captured imaginations. He's now believing the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, which gets every forecast wrong. So he's enslaved himself to this group of failures, and I just don't understand.
He could argue that he steadied the ship. The cost of government borrowing has gone down, inflation has halved, and we've had a slight recession, but largely remained in positive growth.
He can, but actually the cost of the borrowing has gone up, but that's not his fault. Well, interest rates have gone up, and actually Rishi Sunak should have borrowed money at 0.5% when he had the chance during COVID, so that was Sunak's fault. But he doesn't inspire confidence that he's an entrepreneurial Chancellor, and that is the condemnation of him. I mean, he doesn't all the time show up the fallacy of Labour's policy, that they have no plan, they have no actual project for improving the creation of wealth in this country, because not one member of the Labour shadow cabinet has ever earned a penny as a businessman in his or her life. They don't know what profit means, and only with profit do you create wealth. But Jeremy Hunt never shows that up. He's so bland, he's so boring. He's the worst sort of electioneering chancellor the Tories could have at this stage.
It does seem like the political class, whether it's this current Conservative Party, which many think isn't really Conservative at all, and Labour, have forgotten that the way you tackle inequality and deliver social justice is through economic growth, is through national income. What about Labour then? You wrote a cracking book about Jeremy Corbyn. The book is called Dangerous Hero, Corbyn's Ruthless Plot for Power. Sir Keir Starmer is pretty ruthless too. What kind of Prime Minister do you think he'll make?
I don't think he's ruthless at all. I think he's a third-rate lawyer who just mouths an opinion and then quickly reverses himself and somersaults and looks for another idea.
He's chucked people out of the party, including Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, not much.
He's held the line on Israel.
Well, has he? I thought that was the whole point of the great debacle in the Commons the other day, that he had to urge the Speaker to break with convention to protect him from a revolt by his own members. I mean, that's the whole problem. He hasn't held the line. The line should have been that there can't be a ceasefire till Hamas puts down its guns. But instead, he's just fallen in because he's terrified of a revolt. And the whole George Galloway thing has shown how the party actually is riven still with anti-Semitism.
Indeed, that is definitely a concern. And they had, of course, their candidate in Rochdale, who they had to disown because of his conspiracy theory about the idea that October the 7th was actually created by Israel.
But, Mark, imagine that tape recording hadn't come out.
That person would be a sitting Labour MP now.
Exactly. And all the people in that room who endorsed what Mr. Ali said never whispered a word. And that is the frightening aspect. I'm sure throughout the whole of the Labour Party there are dozens of Alis, all of whom have got away with it so far because they haven't been secretly recorded.
Well, listen, Tom, let's bring my top pundits in, if I can. Annunziata Rees-Mogg, Lord Ranger and Nigel Nelson. And let me ask you, Lord Coolvere Ranger, perhaps just in the natural political cycle, that notwithstanding Tom's concerns about a possible Labour government and Keir Starmer, that Britain needs a change. It's time for a change of government.
Well, we need to have a view that says how we're going to deal with the economic situation. And I think, Tom's highlighting some clear Tory views about what Conservative voters are looking for. Dare I say it, growth, lower taxes, investment in the economy, and getting a control of what's happening in terms of the public services and delivery. These are key messages that I think Conservative Party voters are looking for, and maybe they haven't had that clearly coming through. What everyone's hoping is that Wednesday there'll be not just one rabbit, but several rabbits that will be pulled out of the hat. But even as we run up to Wednesday, we're hearing the briefings happening that pot that the Chancellor has is getting ever smaller and smaller. So, expectations are obviously being managed. But I think what the Conservative Party is looking for is something it can stand on as a platform for the next general election, be that sooner or later in this year.
OK, well, Annunziata, the Tories have had 14 years. It's time for a change.
It's certainly time for a change in direction. That up until 2020, we had to abide by the growth and stability targets of the European Union, and that is no longer the case. They have been rewritten into British law, but it is up to our Chancellor as to whether he adheres to exactly what the OBR forecasts, which is notoriously hopeless and inaccurate, or not. And I think this is the exact moment we need bold action. We need a clear change in direction to free our economy and allow growth to start so we can come out of this cost of living crisis and this mire that we have got stuck in of sluggish growth, low productivity, and become a thriving country once more.
Nigel Nelson, Tom Bower is one of the most astute political biographers in the country. He's just described Keir Starmer, potentially our next Prime Minister, as not ruthless, not strong, and a third-rate lawyer. Is he right?
Well, I don't think any of that is right. I think Keir Starmer has been extremely ruthless with his party. And we've talked about the wobble he had over the candidate in Rochdale, but for the most part, he has sort of ripped anti-Semitism out by its roots. So I don't see that. As far as the election date goes, I agree with Tom that you will need to get a Rwanda flight off the ground. One plane with one migrant on board would be enough to actually symbolically show that they've kept to that policy. And they have been laying the groundwork for a May the 2nd election with checking on polling stations that are not having local elections to see their availability. There could be only one reason for that. Bringing in the national insurance cut in January, rushing it through to give people 4 months in their pay packets. The only problem is that they're still, the Labour is still 26 points ahead of the polls. None of that seems to make any difference. So if it does come on May the 2nd, and the final date we'll know to call it will be March the 26th, if it does happen on May the 2nd, it looks like a Tory wipeout.
There you go. Well, look, that is my final question, Tom Bower. Do you think the outcome of the next election is a done deal? Is Mrs. Starmer right to be measuring up curtains for number 10?
Well, I think Mrs. Starmer should just ponder what happened in 2017 when Theresa May went to the polls with a 20% lead and ended up 5 weeks later with a 0% lead and a hung parliament. And the other thing that Mrs. Starmer should remember is that the 40% of the electorate, according to YouGov poll recently, is undecided. So there's a lot to play for. Yes, Labour is ahead now, but if only Sunak and the Tory party could get into a real campaign mode, I think they've got a fighting chance to just retain a slight majority, if not a hung parliament.
A thrill to have Tom Bauer in the studio. I look forward to your speedy return.